de los 17 partners o socios que conforman BIG. Él está hace 14 años con la empresa, está al frente de muchas de las áreas de trabajo de BIG. Ellos están haciendo ahora proyectos increíbles en alrededor de 35 países. Él maneja la oficina de Nueva York, se encarga de montar las oficinas y es como el primer contacto que tienen los clientes con BIG, y él se encarga también de hacer como el último contacto para seguir, no simplemente hacer un proyecto y parar ahí, sino seguir trabajando con las empresas o las personas y las ciudades que los contratan. Para ellos es muy importante tener una relación a largo plazo y tratar de involucrarse no solo en un edificio, sino en qué más pueden desarrollar en la ciudad, en el entorno. Él se encarga de los master plans en algunas ciudades están trabajando, bueno, ya les contará, you're gonna tell them better than me. También están involucrados, él está frente de la parte de landscaping, en las relaciones públicas, en las publicaciones. Bueno, está al frente como de la mayoría de las áreas que cubre BIG de los proyectos. Es un honor para nosotros tenerlo acá y la generosidad de él ofrecer hacer una charla para nosotros y bueno, compartir la experiencia y sembrar aquí un poquito como de inquietud en el futuro de la arquitectura. Welcome.
Yes.
Hi, it's a pleasure to have you here, and it's an honor to have you sharing your experience.
Thank you, Natalia. I think thank you also to the whole team here with Uribe and Schwarzkopf. As you may know, we have been working now here in Quito for the last 2.5 to 3 years. First with the project IQON, which is yes, okay. First with the project IQON, and of course now right here on the site of EPIQ. So I loved seeing this sort of collage of projects. I think it is very inspiring even for us to be working in an environment and with a team that is committed to really bringing, I think, very good design here to Quito. It's my first time. This is a dream of mine to come here to Ecuador. My colleagues who are working on the project from New York are coming every 4 or 5 months. So they come to check on the sites. They come to look at materials and work with the team here. So we've been actually coming to Quito as an office for the last 3 years. Maybe you've seen Bjarke give a lecture as well here, or Thomas Christofferson, Maria, Lucia, Lawrence. These are all people who've been working right here in Ecuador for the last 3 years. So what I wanted to do was to give you a little bit of background on the two projects, why they look the way that they do, and also to then go a little bit into how we at BIG are thinking about the future of the profession, how we also integrate new technologies into our process, our thinking, our designing process, so that you can also, I hope, leave here really truly inspired by both the work that we're doing, but also the work that's left to be done. So I start with this slide because it's the team. These projects, like the IQON and EPIQ, are not possible with just a few people. These are projects that really require dozens and dozens of people working together for many years to make something like this possible. And I think that the biggest transition you make when you are in school, you're often working as an individual, making a project, bringing up ideas, but when you actually enter reality and kind of the professional world, you really have to learn how to work with the people sitting to the left and right of you. You have to learn how to work as a team. That's one of the strongest and most important skills, I think, as an architect. So Bjarke is right there in the center on the sofa. This is right in the sort of the main office of Uribe and Schwarzkopf. and the team that also helps to not only make the project, but then also make sure that it gets executed to the highest level. So BIG is Bjarke Ingels Group. We are now actually a quite large architecture group. We are in, of course, Copenhagen and London. Can I just speak? Is it possible? Here. So we are in New York and in Copenhagen. Copenhagen is where we got our start. We moved to New York about 8-9 years ago. And then we've recently opened up offices in London and in Barcelona, and in a few months also Los Angeles. So this is our office in Copenhagen. This is the one in New York. They're both fairly large. This is the most recent. This is just 2 months ago in Barcelona. So we have now 12 people. Maria, who worked and started on the project right there in the center on the IQON and the EPIQ projects, actually has now moved to help direct the office in Barcelona. And we're very proud of where we come from. And you can see sort of the growth of the office to now about 550 employees or staff. We call them bigsters. So everybody is a kind of bigster. And no matter if you decide to move on and work in other places, you will always be a bigster. And the family of the bigsters is always there for you. So even when you might work on your own, in your own office, and you have some questions, you can call a bigster and they'll help you with your needs. So these 550 people, we come from a lot of different countries. I don't believe we've had someone from Ecuador, but this is really something that I hope you will take with you. We love working with as many different nationalities and different places. We have many people that have come from Colombia, from Chile, Uruguay, Brazil. So there are a lot of different architecture schools that also have connections with our office. And then we take interns for 6 months or 12 months, and then they go back to their schools to finish their degrees. BIG is lifestyle. It is something that we're all very, very passionate about. So this is probably best seen in the sort of the hairstyles. Our process is very iterative, meaning that we don't make a kind of master sketch on a napkin, and then that is what we sort of make. We go through a long and very sort of intensive process of thinking and rethinking and making and remaking the project and the concept. So in both of these cases, EPIQ and IQON, Natalia will be able to tell you, there are maybe hundreds of models of ideas that we did not pursue, but that helped us to get to where we are now with the projects. We work at different scales, so from furniture to small pavilions to larger projects and even regional and city planning. So we work on master plans. We are actually just starting a project in Barranquilla, which is in Colombia, for thinking of how the city can grow from 4 million people that it is today to 8 million people. So imagine getting that as a architecture project. It's a very, very kind of heavy thinking, and you think about traffic systems and sort of energy systems and airports and ports. So you start to think of the city and how it kind of grows and exists organically. And then the buildings are kind of a product, a byproduct out of this thinking of the systems and how a city actually grows and becomes. I think on this level of thinking, when you think of a city and you're thinking of the systems, you can make very important choices of how you want to live in the future. How much energy do you want to use in the future? And so this is something that I think all of you should sort of think about, that of course it's nice to design a building and you have a lot to think about, and in some cases it's very complex. But I think you also have to see how those buildings fit into the entire city and how the city actually functions. No one wants to sit in traffic for half a day. Today we were almost in the traffic for like 2 hours to get from one place to another. And that's time that you could actually spend with your family or with friends or studying or doing other things that I think are as important or more important than just getting from one place to another. So today I also got to go underground, and I got a sneak peek of your new metro. So I went into the station here in the main park, and I got to see what the future of Quito is about. There's a station, I believe, right here across the street. So imagine Quito in 10 or 15 years, what it will look like after the metro is actually functioning. So it's been a really wonderful couple of days for me to kind of take a deep dive into this. So we're going to begin with IQON because that was the first project that we worked on here. And Josef and Tommy Schwarzkopf came into our office, and they were interested to learn about how we would work with them. And as I said, we don't make just a master sketch and say, here, thank you very much. We work with them and with the whole team, Natalia and everybody else, to develop this concept. Our concept for this project is because it's at the park, and the park is a very special place here in the mid-north, we wanted the park to grow up the facade. We wanted, if you look around, there are not too many buildings that take advantage of the climate or of the ability to grow different vegetation. So we wanted to see if we could work within the climate, equatorial climate, and see how the vegetation could actually start to become one with the building. So you can start to see how that happens right there. So for us, now this is your everyday, but for us, working in equatorial climate is amazing. So if I were to tell you that 20 to 30% of every project that we work on is about moving air from one place to another. So we spend so much money because we're trying to make things warmer or cooler or more humid, less humid. It's all about mechanical equipment. You have the luxury here of a constant climate. It's always kind of beautiful and nice. And maybe you want some fresh air, you open the window. Or you close the window. And the glass is a single pane of glass. This is unlike any other place on the planet. Because everywhere you have to, within the facade, you have to create just how many layers of skin? We have 7 layers of skin. These different layers of skin, they do all different things. One keeps you dry, the other one sort of makes sure that the blood is going everywhere. So all the layers have a different function. And I think here, I don't know about your skin, but maybe you have only one layer, right? Because it all does everything. It keeps you dry, it keeps the wind out, and it lets the sunlight in. But that's a true luxury that you have here, unlike any other place on the earth. So for us, it was a great chance to work within that climate. And then I also saw a video today, I love this, but when you're on the equatorial line and you have some water and you have a plug and you do the plug, the water just goes straight down. And you take it just an inch or a foot to the right or to the left, and it starts to swirl one direction or another. Amazing! It was like a YouTube fest. I was just like sitting there watching it over and over and over again. So here is the site. The site is very narrow. It's a residential neighborhood. And we have a longer side, a little bit of a longer side then also to the park. So we knew right away that the massing was going to be like an L shape. We wanted to bring more daylight into the building, so it wasn't just straight up against the other buildings. And there's a new rule that if you actually carve out more site to daylight, and if you do more things that provide better benefit to the city, then you can build taller. So this will be the tallest building in Quito when it's completed, at 32 stories, 32 floors. It will probably be about 7 to 10 floors taller than any other building around it. I'm very proud to say that because Quito is so high and we are building the tallest building, we will have the tallest building in the entire world to sea level. So Burj Khalifa, we are going to have the tallest building right here in Quito. So we then pixelate the facade. The pixelation gives us balconies. It gives us places to put the plants. And we have a very porous first level. And then, as I mentioned, we want the park to just basically grow up the facade. And for the facade to become kind of a part of the park. Here you can see the beginning of kind of the massing, how it fits into the rest of the neighborhood, and the kind of views that it will have. But it's very, it will be a very different looking building from different points of the city. In some places it's going to look very big, in others very, very skinny and slim. So I've already mentioned this. This is some planter, because we're doing everything in concrete cast. So we are casting the planters, which is very nice. Natalia and the team, they just visited Italy, where the formwork is being made. I want you to know, with these buildings, we're bringing products and we're bringing different sources of information from all around the world. So these buildings are like a catalog of best practices, best materials, best kind of lighting systems. You can really learn a lot by just going through the buildings. And so there we have the terraces. We want to bring in trees, like mature little trees as well. It's important that it's not just kind of brush, so that the tree in a way is like a new family member, right? You have your children and then you have your tree outside your window. You open the window and it's a part of the family. And then we really provide as much indoor-outdoor quality as possible. Here we use the same kind of formwork with the trees, but we kind of allow it to sort of be at the street level. I think one of the richest things that I've experienced here in Quito is that the street level is super important. In many cities, people need parking, and the first 6 or 7 levels of cities are parking. There's no street life. You only have a ramp that takes you up. And I think one of the best things that you do here in Quito is that you say, no above street parking. It has to be below ground. And if you go today now to the site of IQON, you can look into 7 stories below ground. It's the deepest hole ever made for a building in Quito. It almost goes as deep as the metro that's being built. So then on the top we have a pool and an open sort of space for the people that are living there. And again, very different types of buildings. There was a sales office that was there just like this, but of course it was taken down when they started the construction. But we could see like the different materials that we would have. And this was just yesterday. We went down into the pit, had to sort of check in with the construction. Everything was going well. And then here we have the EPIQ. So in a few months or half a year, there will be also kind of construction started right here on this block, on this city. So it doesn't look the same, right? It's very different. So here, this is actually, I think, the largest project in one building that Uribe and Schwarzkopf has ever attempted. So it's close to 300 apartments, and it will basically, it could be a very big building, a very big slab. But what is the worst thing as you build tall? It's not the structure or the weight, it's the wind. So you have to be very careful when you build up, like that building across the street. The wind is quite strong at the top. Think of a domino, and when you blow, the domino falls over. So you have to be you have to use a lot of steel and a lot of thick walls. So by opening the building up in the different areas, so if you look at the facade here, this is what we could have built, right? Very important. We could have built this, but then suddenly the building will start to be very bulky, and the steel will get very strong, and the walls will get thicker. So by actually rounding the corners and opening the building up, the wind is allowed to go through, and you can suddenly make things much more open and much less structured. Very important lessons as you're building and thinking about things. Every decision you make on the paper and in a building has repercussions. So you need to go through, when I say we build 100 models, we're going through the 100 different ways we could have made the building, and then we see which of the ways are the strongest ideas. And just like in evolution and Galapagos, right, the island, when you go there, you can start to see how different species are actually the evolution of those species, and that in some respects, because the animals never left the island, they are in a way frozen in a very different moment in history than any of the other animals that have had more evolution. So you see a greater kind of range of possibilities. So the Galapagos Islands are like, if you were to come in the early stages of a big project, we would have like 50 models to choose from. I think that's the Galapagos Islands. And then as we focus and we make the kind of the species into the final selection, then we come closer to what the animals and the species and the development are here on the mainland. So we want to use the inside and outside that is so nice here in Quito. We want the city life on the ground level to be open to the street. And we want this to be a very mixed-use building. So just like the sales center here is a co-working space, it's a laboratory, it allows you to sort of think and reimagine. There's a cafe just around the corner, and upstairs there are different kind of rooms for different uses. That's how we want the building to be. It's really offering you a lot of different qualities. So you can see the relationship between the IQON and the EPIQ in this image. So it's really also thinking of the park now as a room or as a space. The park is a really important element in not only thinking of your room or your home. Your home are the sidewalks. Your home is the park across the street. If you have children, you're going to go there and play with them. You're going to, it's really about expanding the site that you have in your project to include a lot of different things. So in the IQON, the park goes up the facade, and at the EPIQ, we want to kind of open and kind of use the park as a room in the project. So day to night, and this is how we sort of open it. And then we want to bring a kind of handcraftedness. So the terracotta tile that you see here, this is just a prototype. So this is just the first kind of research. Right now we're researching different terracotta factories across the world, from Colombia, from Bogota to I think
Morocco.
Yes.
Denmark,
Morocco, Denmark, Italy, and I just mentioned Germany.
And locally too.
Yes, so we want there to be this ability to kind of find the right terracotta tile and then use different shades of the red to, again, provide a little bit of distinct handcraftedness. I think the other thing I'm very impressed by with Uribe and Schwarzkopf is also the desire to really reinforce and support the local artists. So there's a building they are just opening called the O, which actually has in the ground floor in the lobby a local artisan who works a lot with wicker. And so the columns are actually wrapped around with the wicker that they're just completing right now. So here we have different types of programming. We have a public space that people can activate. We have a play space for the children and the adults who are like children. And we have social spaces and well-being spaces, health spaces. So these are the kind of outdoor spaces that you'll have now at different levels. And of course, they also provide you with views out over the city, and then the chance of having these little small balconies outside of those wonderful windows and doors. And this again has a rooftop space as well. So these are the two projects that brought BIG to Ecuador. I want to kind of, both of these projects are currently in an exhibition that we just opened a month ago in Denmark called Form Giving. We are, of course, a Danish office. So the Danish word for architecture is form giving. Giving form to that which is not yet there. So this building we gave form to, and we were inspired, of course, by history and by the climate and by so many things, but we gave form to this building without it being there before. And I would like for all of you to start to imagine, how would you actually like to live in the future? What do you think the workplaces are like in the future? You don't always have to just inherit the way of living or the way of working from your parents or your ancestors. Imagine the kitchen was a very important room in most cultures. And in a kitchen, you also have a lot of fumes and a lot of smells. And so in many places in the history, the kitchen would be closed with a door and small and not really connected to the rest of the house. But now people want and see the kitchen as the center of the home. They want the kitchen, people coming in and out. They want the island that people all sit around. So the simple use of the kitchen has changed in our minds as of something that makes smells that you may or may not want to smell to something that actually is the heart of any home. And so if you kind of imagine that that is something that's continually changing, our perceptions of how we use space, our perceptions of how we work, this co-working space here is unlike any working space that is in most offices. The furniture can be moved around easily. They have 3D printer bots right behind this poster. They can reshuffle and reimagine this space in a matter of minutes. That's the future of working. The future of working is also not working alone in front of a screen. The future of working is coming together and working collectively to solve problems or challenges. So actually learning how we can work together more is a really important part of actually making the spaces, designing the spaces so that that can actually happen. So this is the exhibition in the Danish Architecture Center. There's Lego models of our projects. You can build your own futures. We have 75 projects that we're showing with our own kind of process and showing how the final building actually came to be. So if any of you are in Europe and you might be traveling through Denmark, please go see this exhibition. It's up until January. And then we finished the exhibition with thinking about the future. And we end the exhibition with living on Mars. That if we have rockets going to Mars, right? They're building rockets. In a few years, those rockets will reach Mars. There will be astronauts, cosmonauts, taikonauts getting out of those rockets, staying on the planet for a day or a few hours or maybe even a week, 2 weeks, who knows. But we probably will start to colonize, we probably will start to hang out on those places. It's the same thinking, like people live in the coldest climates, right? In the coldest Siberia, in Antarctica, there are people living there year-round, actually adapted themselves to harsh climates all the time. It's in our nature to just travel and see how the body can adjust. So we are thinking about how those settlements on the planet actually will kind of happen. Now, many people, there are people who say, why spend the money to go to Mars or to the moon and make a settlement? We have so many problems to deal right here on Earth. We believe that if we can figure out how to live on the moon or on Mars, we will actually help ourselves to deal with the problems that we have right here. So if you think about how much energy we use, if you think about how much food we eat, right? We all like beef, but beef requires lots of land, it requires lots of water. It's huge to consider how we as a species, the population grows, but then what nutrients do we need to actually survive? People going to the moon or Mars are going to be eating a very different diet than we eat here on Earth. Maybe if we learn how to live in those places, we can start to think about and alter our diet here so that we can actually use the planet in a much more and better way. So, in order for us to deal with the future, we realized that we could not do this only as an architecture office. We needed something more. So we have added landscape, we've added engineering, we've added, of course, architecture, but now we do interiors, we do space planning, and we are doing a lot more planning, product design. So Big Leap is our holistic approach to thinking about architecture. And we are integrating landscape into all of our projects. So this is a project in Manhattan. It's an office building. If you go to New York, you see so many office buildings. Hundreds of years of office buildings. This will be the first office building that has an outdoor terrace on every single floor. If you need to smoke a cigarette, you can go outside. If you need to smell the roses or smell see the bees, you can go outside. You can now have a connection to the outdoors. In most office spaces in New York, you will go there in the morning. You will be under artificial light. There may not even be a window. You don't even know if it's raining outside. And then at 5 o'clock, you put your sneakers on and you go back out. And that's the first time you've actually connected with the outdoors again. So we believe it's good for us if we can create a better connection to both landscape and plants and also inside and outside. So we also do our own engineering. So this is the thinking of, okay, how do we actually start to think about building and the engineering? And that's structural, mechanical, electrical, and plumbing. So the whole engineering ideas. We do interiors. This is a restaurant in Copenhagen, which is very connected to the gardens because they're growing the food outside the restaurant. And then we're looking at creating workspaces that are much more about using daylight and not only artificial light. And then we use modeling to figure out how all of this can actually work. What is the daylighting kind of modulation? What is the wind? How is the wind affecting? So if we design this building, what is the top garden going to feel like when you're outside sitting outside between those spaces? So there was a very famous author. He wrote Neuromancer, a book that you might have read. And he said that the future is actually all around us. It's just not very evenly distributed. What he's saying is, you always think of the future 100 years from now, maybe. Maybe you're thinking of the future 50 years from now. But literally, the future is in the phone that you have, that you carry around. The future is in maybe someone coming and starting to talk about electrical subways and using electricity instead of fuel or gas, combustion engine. The future and how we live in the future is all around us. All we need to do is have our eyes open, make a connection between the phone, between the building, the different construction techniques, the energy, and we can suddenly make our own future right where we have the power to make something unique. So we are working with artificial intelligence now. Before, when we were working, we would do a lot of research And if you were working at BIG, you could spend 1 or 2 weeks just going to the kind of Google Earth, finding out information, going to Wikipedia, to Street View, going into the history of the site and looking at different pictures. And it would take you about 1 to 2 weeks, so 5 to 10 days, to put together a research of a site. This site right here in Quito. So because this information is all publicly available, right? It's on websites, it's in the municipality, it's in different archives, and all you're doing is you're spending your time going into these publicly accessible pieces of information, and we're using human time, brain time, to do something that actually is very kind of administrative. So we are developing a script that actually is able parametrically to access all of that information, and what would take us 1 or 2 weeks, we can do by hitting a button in a few seconds. So we no longer have to use our own brain time on such administrative things, because we can literally ask the kind of the artificial intelligence to retrieve all of that information, where it finds it, and collects it in the way that we want it. And the output is the report, as we would have. And then we can use the brain power on the creative part of actually designing the building. Does everyone follow me? So, now we know how far the airport is from the site, because the AI, the artificial intelligence, can just go in, look on a Google Earth, and make that calculation, and the information is there. The same with the site. In this case, it's in Copenhagen. It's the Tivoli Park. We know what streets there are. We know what public transportation, the bus stops, where the bike parking is. We know the green spaces. All of those things are known. We can map it out, and we can quickly provide that information. What are the biggest, most important kind of buildings? The history of that site, and then kind of the history through photography of everything. So this is actually an amazing thing, because it takes all of the things that you would spend time on and does it for you. Once you've written the script, it's there. Every project, we can hit a button, we can give the coordinates of the site, and we get the report. With the report, we can start to design. And so the project and the client that has helped us to figure this out is Google. We have, of course, been working with Google for 6 years. We have 8 projects, and they are helping us to think about this scripting and how we can actually start to help that with the design process. So this is the Google headquarters in California that is now under construction. It's an office building for 5,000 people. This is an office building. Doesn't look like an office building, right? This is the market. This is where you go for your coffee. This is where the bathrooms are. This is where you can meet your colleagues. They believe, Google believes, that innovation does not happen between you and a computer screen. Innovation happens when you meet somebody, when you have a conversation. And so they're as interested in the spaces that we create to socialize as they are about the desks and the computer screens. So again, this space right here, the lab, I think is another great example of being here, something is happening. This does not happen back in your office space in front of a screen. So this is what the office space looks like. And we're building about 4 of these different tents. And this is the construction site as it is right now. It's pretty epic. So AR, VR. We are working on augmented reality and virtual reality. This is nothing new. There have been experiments using this for the last, 40, 50 years. But the attempts of AR, VR have always been kind of lost because you have to put the big goggles on, you kind of get disoriented, people sometimes feel dizzy, and then also it's always been used as a marketing, not as a design tool. So you show, what it's like to move into a residence. It's not used for design until, I think, now. So throughout history, people have always had to provide some visualization so that people who are not architects can actually think about the space. Because visualization of space is maybe what we are trained to do, but the general public doesn't have the best or greatest understanding. So we have to find ways to bridge that communication divide. And this project, the Spiral, the one with the gardens on each level, is a project where the client asked us to use AR, VR as a design tool. Help us to figure out what decisions to make, when, by looking at the actual space. So this is a building, in a typical office building, all of the floors are separated. And our idea here is to connect all the floors through this green kind of element. So you have gardens on the outside, which are these spaces, but then the gardens on the outside also come to the inside, and they provide stairs that connect all the different floors. So that's a big ask, because you're changing the way that office buildings are built. And so you're having to educate and bring the clients along for what you're proposing. And so in this case, we had to sort of model and make an explanation of this. And this is a short little video that shows how we made that kind of connection. So we bring them in, we show them the different spaces. There's lab spaces. And then we can start taking things away, putting them back. They can suddenly see that they have an AR, VR kind of assistant that helps them actually use the spaces that they have. And so this was an amazing tool that we are now integrating. This was the first project. We're now doing it actually, and I would say half of the projects that we're doing right now, we're using some form of AR, VR in the actual design process. Then sensing. So we've talked AI, artificial intelligence, AR, VR, and now sensing. So what exactly do I mean by that? Check this out. This is in the future, 2028, about 10 years from now.
First colony established on Mars. Main support. You have received an updated 3D model from the architects. There are two conflicts with the landscape design.
Quick desktop. Activate Hyperform.
Hyperform activated.
Show me project 1280.
Displaying project 1280. Project's content.
Load the landscape file. Show me plot 3.
So these are folders
Displaying
on your
plot
computer
3.
screen.
Now display 3D models.
New model set 1 minute ago.
This is an update to an existing
Right,
model.
load.
He's now taking
Highlight
the
the
drawing
design
and putting it on a table.
Displaying conflicts.
Activate slice tool. Activate tree tool.
Someone's calling from another office.
Morning, Jordan. Good morning. Yeah, it wasn't too bad. It was just a couple of things. Hyperform. Activate real world scale.
Activating.
You're using the walls as a visualization.
Activate the slice tool. Tree tool.
You received an updated 3D model. There are 37 conflicts with your landscape design.
So, of course, we're always changing things. As soon as we think we've made all the changes, we have a new set of changes. But this is to show that we can create the tools that we need to design the world that we want to live in. So this is a project that we're doing. We're helping to finance, prototype this with UN Studio. You probably know them as a Dutch office, and Squint Opera. They are a kind of visualization office. And so our hopes is to really create a tool that works for us, but then we open source it to the rest of the profession. And it's called Hyperform. Robotics. So we can see that, you know, the industrial age and how robots have entered into the kind of making of things is nothing new. This is again something that, you know, the automotive industry has been using robots since the 1980s. And this is when I said that the future is all around us. It's just not evenly distributed. So if robots have already been in use in the automotive industry for so long, how come they haven't made it to the architectural scene or the architectural construction kind of way? We're now starting to see how robots are entering into construction. So when you look at productivity, how, you know, the same number of people become more and more productive by the tools that they have, all the industries really have a huge curve up because they're becoming more and more efficient with time. But the construction industry has actually stayed flat or has become less productive per person because there's more and more regulations. So a person that could jump up on a ladder and screw in a light bulb now has to put on a safety harness, stick themselves onto the ladder, then they like crawl up the ladder, put the light bulb in, and then they have to come back down, unharness. And that is literally why construction has become less productive. So we believe that robots are actually going to be one of those big leap moments where we see a higher productivity within the industry. So we're looking at, this is an actual robot making a bridge as a 3D print. So this is a welder welding kind of a metallic powder. A self-supporting structure that is a bridge that can crawl. So the robot actually works from both ends and then meets in the center. So this is actually in production. There's one in Amsterdam over a canal right now. So we are trying to see how that will start to also infiltrate and find its way into different places. We're working on a project in Taiwan that is using 3D print but with a concrete mix to create kind of hotel rooms. So of course, a wall can't stay up by itself. So, but if you bend the wall, it has structural integrity. And so we're using that concept of using a single line of a 3D printed wall to create rooms and spaces. In this case, around a sort of half courtyard. So here's the concept for these sort of hotel rooms sharing the pool in the center. So we've just gone through sensing, robotics, AI, AR, VR, and now transportation. We see true kind of movements in transportation. There's been the transportation as we know it, the cars that are outside, the planes that are flying into Quito. So if you look at the history from the wheel to the horse and buggy to ships to rail, trains, cars, and planes, you know, if you were to just say that's it, you know, there's never going to be another invention, I think we wouldn't be very true to ourselves. Of course, there will always be new inventions, new paradigms. We believe that there's a new paradigm right now called the Hyperloop. The Hyperloop is an idea that was born by Elon Musk, who's also doing SpaceX, and of course the Tesla electrical car. And it's every time there's a paradigm shift, you are reducing the amount or the time to travel in distance. So we now have actually the ability to send a capsule, a pod of 4, 6, 8 people through a vacuum tube at around 1,000 kilometers an hour or 800 miles an hour. That's faster than a plane is actually traveling. So Elon Musk came up with this idea, but he didn't have time to really work on it. So he put it out and just said, if anyone wants to do this idea, please, I'll help to support you. So 3 companies right now are all investigating this technology. And we're working with Virgin Hyperloop 1. This is their test track in Las Vegas, outside of Las Vegas in the Nevada desert. And we're just now creating and designing a pod to travel about 600 miles an hour. So they're reaching soon the 800 mile an hour mark. This is a prototype that's to prove to the first investors that this can actually go into production. So there are many cities right now that have these feasibility studies. We made a concept also for Abu Dhabi to Dubai. It's typically 3 hours by car to travel from Abu Dhabi to Dubai. And in the Hyperloop, it's 12 minutes. So we made this little video to explain. So his wife is texting him, our parents are having an anniversary tonight or a birthday. Please come. He looks and checks, how do I get to Abu Dhabi fastest? Do I take a ride share? The fastest way is the Hyperloop. He schedules his pod and he makes it his way to the station. In the station, there are different pods. He enters a 4-seat pod or 6-seat pod.
The Hyperpod is the long-haul vehicle of the Hyperloop 1 system.
Four pods are in one cylinder.
It is a comfortable and safe transport hall for passenger and cargo pods. All levitation and guidance systems fit seamlessly underneath. Secure airlocks are at each end. Inside the Hyperpod, passenger and cargo pods can glide smoothly at airline speeds right to their destination.
And this is in a vacuum tube. Faster than the flight. It's a nice ride. Pods are actually autonomous vehicles, so you can actually take the pod to your front door. You can go on a road and drive all the way to your destination. From the time that he got the phone call or SMS to the time that he's at home. So just as you are building your first 28 miles of subway and metro, and I heard that your subway, the 28 kilometers, was the fastest actually ever built anywhere on the planet. So we're getting quite good at building these infrastructures, and I can totally say that the Quito that you know today is going to be entirely different once the metro opens and people start to see the city along the line of the metro, and you'll already start discussing new lines and new connections from one part of the city to the other. But then imagine you can actually leap over those discussions about that subway system and start talking about a Hyperloop system for all of Ecuador. Or let's talk about a pan-American Hyperloop that connects all of Latin America to Central America. So we are helping and are thinking of these regional kind of plans, just as you would have a subway map for Quito now, you could have a subway map or a Hyperloop map for an entire region. And that's really our way that I think we've come to a point where we need to not only think of ourselves and our own cities or our own regions, we really need to think about the planet. And you know, the plastic that you use today and that you throw into the trash ends up somewhere in a river, a lake, or the ocean. We are all connected. And that is to say that I think our responsibility in terms of designing is something that is more holistic and needs to be more planetary. We need to understand where are our resources. You know, the concrete mix that you're making here, the sand is probably from Australia. Does that make sense? There's probably other sand deposits that are closer. Or does concrete really make sense as a building material if you could actually build out of other materials? Those are the kinds of questions that we should be asking ourselves. So we at BIG, our next kind of thinking is actually to create a master plan for the planet. We call it Master Planet. And it's to really think about how, not to look at socio kind of geographic, political maps of the world, but to think about where does the water flow, right? Where are the ridge lines? Where are the resources? Why do we have shipping containers going in one direction full and in the other direction empty? That doesn't make sense. How can we create a more sensible kind of planet where the decisions that we make start to factor into how we live and how we use the planet that we have? We only have one. So before we all have to go to Mars because we screwed this planet up, my hope today is that I've given you kind of an inspiration for how you want to live, how you want to work, play, and learn in the future. Thank you very, very much. Maybe open for questions if you guys have any questions. I think there's someone here that is able to help facilitate.
Why do you choose the red color in this building? I don't know, because
why not?
The Schwarzkopf is white here.
Yeah, why not? I mean, I have to say that when I come to Quito and I'm looking around, a lot of the buildings really don't say much. They are just sort of building buildings to build spaces for people. They're not necessarily kind of thinking or making urban kind of gestures or urban conversations. So I think there's a lot of utilitarian architecture. And that's the case for many cities. I think that, you know, Frank Gehry said famously a few years ago that literally, you know, 99% of what's out there is crap. And I think there's some truth to it that, you know, every single time you're putting a building there, that's there for the next 50 years or more. And you have the ability to make decisions and to contribute to the city and to the life of the city. And I think we should hold ourselves to a higher ambition. The city officials, the city planning department, the citizens, everyone should have a higher ambition to what a city can be. And so I think that we chose the terracotta because it's from the earth. It's using earthen materials. We wanted to use different shades of the terracotta to show a kind of textile kind of quality. And you know, we're not making kind of references to any kind of embroidery or rug that. We feel that in this way of working with terracotta, on a building level, we can bring the hand into such a large building. For us, it was about that. This is maybe the biggest project that Uribe and Schwarzkopf ever made, but it's not. It doesn't have to lose the hand quality. Yes.
So one of the big problems is affordability. So like there's a lot of poverty in many countries. So has that ever been discussed on how that's going to be possible? Because a lot of people here may not be able to use, for example, Hyperloop that exists here. Has that been discussed in your company?
Sure. So we literally, I think, probably are building, I'd say, about 100 to 200 affordable units every year. If you look at the range of our projects, we're not building only for a small segment of the population. Our beginnings as an office, we're building affordable housing in Copenhagen. We also are looking at certain areas, like student housing is very difficult because it's so expensive. So there are 40,000 students in Denmark that live with their parents or sleep on sofas at their friends. So we actually went out and looked at sort of reusing, upcycling shipping containers, rearranging them, not in sort of a stack of dumb shipping containers, that's been done before, but reimagining how the shipping containers can create a social space for the students to live. And those in Copenhagen prices, they're paying about 600 euro a month, where a similar space would probably cost them twice or three times that. We also have a project called Floating Cities, where as sea levels rise, we have a new situation because there are people that are living on islands in the Pacific and all around the world where they're losing their habitat, they're losing their place. We will have in 20 or 30 years hundreds of thousands of climate refugees, people who are going to look for a place to live somewhere else. Maybe you won't feel it directly in Ecuador, but the stresses, the economic stresses, will be felt in some way. So we are developing with the UN a concept for developing low-cost, affordable, floating cities. Think the water world, for lack of a better term, of providing shelter and a place to live for those families. So I think there are many ways to deal with affordability. Many times we find that affordability isn't always about building cheaply or I would say, dumbly. It's about providing options at all the different scales. Because in San Francisco, the reason there's an affordability issue is because there's not enough housing. More people have been moving to San Francisco than they have built units. And so, of course, demand and supply teaches us that the price goes up. If they had just decided 10 years or 15 years ago to keep pace with the number of people coming in, then they wouldn't have the affordability issue that they have today. So I think it's a political policy issue. It is one that also every single client should address, because if you create too much inequity, you create disturbance. And banks don't like disturbance, cities don't like disturbance. So creating equitable options for people is in everyone's interest. And I think that as architects, we should be working for everyone, 100% of the people, not 1% or the 99%. We need to really focus on everybody.
Hi, my name is Brian Olivo. I am part of the National Architecture Students Assembly. It is nice to see someone from New York. It's a very special city for me because my parents and my sisters live there. I found your master talk really joyful, and the question is the next. As a student and in the college, there was a really big discussion of the project of the IQON and the EPIQ, and we wanted to know, and we discussed a lot, if there was a solar study made for the impact that the buildings made on the buildings that are surrounding the project.
Yes, so I showed a couple of slides where I showed simulations, wind simulations, sun and solar radiation. So we do those studies in-house. We have our own engineers and our own kind of simulation tools. So yes, Of course, when you build tall, then you start having an impact on shade, shadow, and so forth. But the thing to remember is it never stays constant. It's continually changing. I think this may be equatorial climate, but I think you have 4 seasons in one day, every day, right? So if you go up to the mountain, it's snowing up there maybe today. If you are in here, you could be freezing one moment and then sweating the next. So the same is for the sun. I think the sun is a very dynamic kind of thing, and sometimes it's shining and casting a shadow, and sometimes it's not. As the city is thinking about its future, this is very important. When you build a metro station, don't expect the buildings around the metro station to stay like they are. It doesn't make sense. You want the metro stations to become more dense because you want people to walk to the stations. If your feeling is that everything should stay the same as it is today, and then we keep making Quito bigger and bigger, and we keep building more and more homes on the edge, like suburbia, America has a problem. Phoenix, a city we all know, right? Arizona. Phoenix uses up 350 square miles. Think about it. 350 square miles is the city. So if I'm working at the city water department, there is some toilet out 50 miles away from the city center that I have to service. I have to flush that toilet every single day. I have to go pick up the trash from these other homes. The more that our cities grow wider and wider, the more difficult it becomes to service them. So a city like Phoenix is spending over 50% of their tax money on just keeping everything alive or going, and not thinking about the investments into the infrastructure, or keeping things or improving things. So these things are things that we need to consider. There's a metro coming. The metro station is right here. It will have an effect on how tall the buildings are. So I think when you have that conversation in a school setting, the discussion should actually be more nuanced. What are our cities in Quito, what is Quito going to look like with the impact of the metro station? And how do we design buildings that are not only taller, but they also benefit the city more? So we need to make a balance. You can't build taller if you don't invest in green space, open space, parks, into spaces for people. Then you can start to leverage all of these things. That's my answer to
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned about all the greenery in different projects, and I've seen more like an ornamental part and also a mental health perspective. Although I'm curious about, are you taking into account other benefits like thermal comfort?
Yes.
Or CO2 capturing? Or
Yes.
Other benefits of greenery?
So our landscape concept is performative landscape. The landscape needs to perform. It's not purely decorative. So carbon capture, the thing that we can do most right now is to plant trees. The trees take out the carbon that we're creating and are sucking them up. Instead of cutting trees down, like in the Amazon, we need to start making more trees and finding ways. So in Paris, the mayor has decided to plant forests in all of the old French gardens, the Tuileries, and all of these beautiful gardens that were made, 200 or 300 years ago, with the concept of sort of geometric patterns of flowers and sort of. She says that's no longer the benefit, Now these open spaces, they should perform for Paris. And if we're going to have more population and more cars and more carbon, let's plant forests to offset those things. We think of the heat island effect. So by actually planting 50% of the roofs in Singapore, the Singaporeans have done this for 30, 40 years. They've reduced the temperature by 2 to 3 degrees Celsius in the center of Singapore. Now, you can go to a bank and you can say, we're going to use less energy for our air conditioning because there's less temperature to cool. And then the banks should be able to finance you getting a green roof onto your existing building. Do you understand? Like, you should find ways to make this change possible. So if every building in Quito right now is white or a black roof, you're missing out. Make those roofs green or half green, and you will see suddenly how the temperature is probably not affected in a place like Quito. But in other places, you would affect the temperature, believe me. So, but there are other things that you can do with landscape that is more performative. So those are things that are biophilia, so the way that people feel. The healthier, there are fewer days that are lost to sickness in places that incorporate plantings into the workspace. Yeah, that's it. All right.
¿Alguien más tiene una pregunta?
Thank you so much, everybody.